Was your whole world about the size of one corner? The store, the tap room, the water ice window, and the 6 houses in between? Can you still taste a paper cup of lemon water ice eaten on a marble step in the sun, with a little wooden spoon that was no use to anybody? Do you remember cutting a pink rubber ball clean in half and hooking one of those halves up over a rooftop and calling that a home run? And do you remember running home from school to watch a program that came out of one building in West Philadelphia and told the whole country how to dance? I'm Henry. Welcome to Sweet Old America. The interest you have shown this channel lately has given us a great deal of heart, and we are steadily nearing our goal of 1,000 subscribers. So if these old streets are yours too, subscribe, and thank you kindly for the company. Today we're going back to the Row House Corners, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the summer of the 1960s. 2 million people, nearly all of them living wall to wall in row houses, in 6 or 7 different cities that all happen to share one name. South Philly with the market carts out on 9th Street. Kensington under the elevated tracks, in the shadow and the roar of it. North Philly and Columbia Avenue and a marquee up on Broad. West Philly's porches, Germantown's cobblestones. Every one of them certain that theirs was the real Philadelphia and the rest were visitors. And they all met downtown, under the Eagle at Wanamaker's, where this city had been telling itself for 2 generations, "Meet me at the Eagle." And on a Friday evening in July, half of them got in the car and drove for the shore. So pull a chair over and sit down. It is going to be 90 degrees on that pavement by noon, and there is a whole city out on its steps waiting for us. 6 o'clock in the morning on 9th Street in South Philadelphia, and the market is already an hour into its day. The men are out in the street rolling the stands into place. Wooden carts and folding tables and crates run out from the storefronts and set up along the curb the way they had been set up every morning for 60 years. The awnings come cranked down over the sidewalk against the sun that is not up yet. And the trucks are unloading, crates of peaches and tomatoes and corn, boxes of lemons, sacks of onions, and the ice going into the fish stands in blocks that a man breaks up with a pick and shovels level with his hands. The smell of that street at 6 in the morning is a thing you would remember for 60 years. Fish on ice, cold and clean and sharp. The cheese shop with the door propped and that heavy, sour, wonderful smell of provolone hanging in nets. Coffee. Bread out of a bakehouse that had been going since 3. Blood and sawdust from the butcher. And a little later, when the sun got up over the roofs, somebody would start roasting peppers, and that smell went down the whole block and got into your clothes, and made every single person who passed hungry, whether they had eaten or not. They called it the Italian market by the 1940s, because the men who owned those stands and the families who shopped them were Italian, and it ran along 9th Street from Fitzwater down to Wharton. And the noise of it. Everybody selling out loud, over each other, in 2 languages and sometimes 3, English and Italian, and the particular version of both that only exists on that street. Nobody stood behind a counter and waited. They called out what they had and what it cost, and what was wrong with the fellow across the way who was charging more for it. You did not touch the fruit. Every child in South Philadelphia learned that inside of one summer, usually the hard way, because the man picked the fruit and you did not, and if you squeezed a peach with your thumb, you would hear about it from him, and then again from your mother. Now step off 9th Street and go 2 blocks into the neighborhood itself, and let me show you what most of this city actually looked like. Row houses. 2 stories, brick, joined wall to wall for the entire block. So a street was one long brick front with doors and windows punched into it. Marble steps at the door, 2 or 3 of them, scrubbed. A little awning over the front window with a scalloped edge, and a metal glider or 2 kitchen chairs out on the pavement. No yards, no driveways, no garages. What you had was your front step, the pavement in front of it, and a corner at each end of the block. And that was the whole world, and it was enough. It was crowded, and it was close, and everybody knew everything. On a block like that, you knew the name of every family between your door and the corner. You knew whose father worked nights. You knew whose son had gone into the service. Somebody's grandmother sat in the front window all day with the curtain hooked back and a pillow on the sill, and nothing that happened on that pavement went unrecorded. A stranger walking down that street was noticed by 4 people before he got to the 3rd house, and if he stopped, somebody came to a door. And there was a question in this city that you got asked before anybody asked where you worked, and it is a question that would make no sense in most of America. What parish are you from? Because Philadelphia did not think in neighborhoods so much as in parishes. Every few blocks had a Catholic church with a school attached, and that parish's name was how you told a stranger where you lived and roughly who you were. Your street, your school, your team, your dances, your whole idea of the world, all of it inside about 6 blocks. 2 men could meet at a job downtown, get the parish names out of each other in the first minute, and know instantly whether they had friends in common. And in the Protestant blocks and the black neighborhoods, the same thing happened with the church on the corner. It was not really about religion at all. It was a map. This city ran on a map that was never printed anywhere. You could hear where somebody was from the second they opened their mouth. This city has an accent that is held on harder than most. Water comes out wooder, and a group of people is yous, and everybody says down the shore, and nobody says the beach. And a Philadelphian could hear the difference between South Philly and Kensington and the Northeast in about 4 words, and would tell you so. And the street had its own traffic that had nothing to do with cars. The milkman with the bottles and a wire carrier before dawn, and the box by the door. The bread truck. The produce truck, working the block slow with a man calling out what he had, so a woman could buy her tomatoes without leaving her own step. The knife and scissors man with his grinding wheel, ringing a bell, and every mother on the block coming out with the kitchen knives wrapped in a towel. And the junk man with a horse, an actual horse into the 60s, collecting rags and iron and old sinks, calling out down the street in a voice that had been calling out down that street for 30 years. And out at the end of the block was the corner. And that corner was the most important institution in this city, because a Philadelphia corner had a store on it, a little grocery run out of the ground floor of a row house by the family that lived upstairs. The wooden floor, the bell on the door, the cold case, the penny candy at a child's eye level, and the book under the counter where the block's credit was written down between paydays. On another corner was the tap room, and the tap room was the men's front room, with a bar down one side, a shuffleboard table, a television up on a bracket, and a side door for the ladies. And on a third corner in the summertime, there was a window with a hand-painted sign, and out of that window came water ice. Now, if you are not from here, that needs explaining, because this is not a snow cone, and it is not ice cream. Water ice, and here it is pronounced wooder ice, and I am not going to argue with 2 million people about it, is Sicilian in origin, made with real fruit and sugar and ice, churned so it comes out somewhere between a sorbet and a snowball. Lemon was the one. Lemon with the little bits in it. And you got it in a paper cup with a flat wooden spoon that was completely useless. So after 2 spoonfuls, every child in Philadelphia gave up and squeezed the cup and ate it off the top like an animal, sitting on a marble step in the sun with it running down their wrist. Coming up the street behind him, most likely, was the pretzel man. Soft pretzels came into this region with the Pennsylvania Dutch and had been sold on Philadelphia streets since the 1820s. And by the 60s, a man could work a corner all day with a box strapped around his neck and a jar of yellow mustard. Philadelphia soft pretzels come in a strip stuck together, so you pulled yours off the row. A stripe of mustard down the middle. Chewy, salty, still a little warm. That was breakfast for half the children in Philadelphia on the way to school, and lunch for a good many of the men at the mill. And this corner and street city invented a whole menu that the rest of the country eventually stole. The cheesesteak was born here in the 1930s at a South Philly stand that grew into Pat's, and once a product called Cheese Whiz came on the market in 1952, the cheese went onto the steak and the sandwich took the shape it has now. The rival opened up right across the intersection in 1966, Geno's, and those two corners have been arguing about it ever since, with the customers taking sides like it was a religion, which in this city it is. The hoagie is Philadelphia's own word and Philadelphia's own sandwich, and this city later made it official. And in every lunch bag in every neighborhood, there was a tasty cake. Baked here since 1914, individually wrapped, delivered fresh every single day. A butterscotch crimpet, a candy cake, a jelly crimpet, and if you grew up here, you can taste that cellophane opening right now. Now let's leave South Philly and go north and east, because this was 6 or 7 cities sharing one name, and the next one over does not look or sound anything like the one we just left. Kensington and Fishtown, the Irish and the Polish and the German mill neighborhoods, and the first thing about them is the noise overhead. Because the elevated train ran right down Kensington Avenue, up on its iron structure over the middle of the street, so that whole shopping avenue lived underneath a steel roof in a permanent gray shadow, with the light coming down in bars between the ties, and every few minutes the entire street going dark and thundering as a train came over the top of it. The second thing about those blocks was the mills. Great brick buildings 4 and 5 stories high, standing right in among the houses, with hundreds of windows and a stack going up and a whistle on the roof. Carpet mills, hosiery mills, lace mills, dye works. A man could walk out his front door, go around the corner, and be at work in 4 minutes. Whole streets emptied into one mill gate at 7 in the morning and filled back up at 3:30 in the afternoon. The lint got into everything. You could tell what a street worked at by what was in the air on it. And those blocks were tight. Irish on one side of a street and Polish on the next. The parish church at the top of the block, the corner bar with the same 12 men in it, a row house front step scrubbed with the same care as anywhere in town. If you were from Fishtown, you said so, and you meant it as a whole biography. Now go west a mile or two, and you are in North Philadelphia. And this is the largest and in many ways the most important neighborhood in this story. North Philly was Black Philadelphia, hundreds of thousands of people, in row houses and larger old houses cut into apartments, in a stretch of the city that ran for miles. Columbia Avenue was its shopping street, the clothing stores and the shoe stores, the record shop, the hardware, the fish place, the beauty parlors and the barbers, the storefront churches with hand-painted signs between them. Broad Street ran through it, wide and grand, and up on North Broad there was a marquee that everybody in that half of the city could tell you about, the Uptown Theater, which we are going into tomorrow night, and which was to Philadelphia what the Apollo was to New York. And that neighborhood in that decade was two things at once, and both are true. It was full of life, the stoops and the corners and the music out of the windows, the churches full, the children everywhere, families who had come up from Virginia and the Carolinas and Georgia in the migration and had built something. And it was also a neighborhood being squeezed. The old houses were old, the landlords were mostly somewhere else, the jobs were leaving the city, and a black family's money went further nowhere else because the doors that were shut were shut. This city's hardest years were not far off. But on a summer evening in the middle of that decade, Columbia Avenue was crowded and lit and going strong. Cross the Schuylkill and you are in West Philadelphia, and everything gets a little wider and a little greener. Bigger row houses, some of them stone, with actual front porches. A porch in Philadelphia is a genuine luxury, and shade trees along the curb. 52nd Street was that side of town's main street, and on a Saturday it was solid people. And out at 46th and Market, in a plain brick building, was a television studio we are going to talk about at length, because for 7 years that building told the entire United States what to wear and how to dance. Up Germantown Avenue you would go rattling over cobblestones, real cobblestones, with the trolley tracks set in them, past old stone houses that had been standing since before the Revolution, into Germantown and Mount Airy and Chestnut Hill. And down in the other direction, along the river, Manayunk climbed straight up a hill in stacked rows so steep that the streets had steps in the sidewalks, with the mills down at the bottom by the canal. And this city had more threads in it than the big four neighborhoods let on. There were the Jewish blocks with their bakeries and delicatessens, and the shops along South Street, where you could still be fitted for a suit by a man who argued with you about the fabric. There was Chinatown, a few compact blocks with its own signs and its own restaurants, where half the city went for a meal after a night out. There were Ukrainian and Lithuanian and Greek churches with onion domes and gold letters dropped in among the row houses. And through those same years, Puerto Rican families were coming up and settling into blocks in North Philadelphia. And a new set of grocery stores and a new music started coming out of the windows on certain streets, and the block adjusted, the way blocks do, one family at a time, with the children figuring it out first on the pavement and the grown people taking a while longer. And then there was the Northeast, which was where this whole story starts to turn without anybody noticing. Because out at the edges of the city, in those years, they were building new, single houses and twins with driveways and a patch of lawn, on streets with no corner store because everybody had a car and a supermarket. And the young couples out of South Philly and Kensington who had a little money and a new baby started moving out there. Their mothers were furious, and they went anyway. And every year there were a few more empty row houses back on the old block. And every one of those neighborhoods had the same answer to a heat wave, and it came out of the ground. The hydrant. A man with a wrench, and then 150 pounds of city water out into the street, and every child on the block in it inside a minute with their clothes on. Somebody would find a tin can and punch out both ends to aim the spray, and the water would go up over a parked car and hit the second-floor windows across the way, and a woman would put her head out and say something about it and be entirely ignored. And when the fire company came around and shut it down, everybody would drift up to the playground instead, where the city ran a sprinkler on a concrete pad, and there would be 40 children under it. And if your neighborhood had a swim club, and a good many of the row neighborhoods put one together, a concrete pool behind a fence with a chain-link gate and a membership your father paid by the season, then that was your entire July. You went at 10 in the morning with a towel around your neck, and you came home at 5, chlorinated, sunburnt, starving, and having spent the whole day in a place where every single person knew your family. There'd be a snack bar with soft pretzels and water ice. There'd be a lifeguard chair with a teenager in it who thought a great deal of himself. And there would be one boy who could do a flip off the board, and everybody knew his name. Now, all of these neighborhoods were tribes, and they mostly kept to themselves. But there was one place they all went, and every single person in Philadelphia knew it. Downtown, Market Street. And going downtown was an event with a whole procedure to it. Your mother decided on a Wednesday that you were going Saturday. Your good shoes came out and got polished. You were spoken to in advance about your behavior, and spoken to again on the trolley, and reminded once more on the sidewalk outside the door. Ladies wore gloves in the summer to go shopping, and hats, and every woman on that trolley was dressed as though she were going somewhere that mattered, because she was. The trip had its own courses, like a meal. The stores in order, oldest child to youngest, whatever anybody actually needed. The shoe department, where they put your foot in the machine and measured it. Lunch at a counter or in the store's own dining room, which for a child was the entire point of the day. A grilled cheese, a Coke with crushed ice, and the ceremony of a paper napkin in your lap. Then the escalator, which some children rode more than was strictly necessary. And then home on the trolley at 4 o'clock with your feet gone and a shopping bag in your lap, and your mother sitting there having conquered the day. You put on your good clothes to go downtown, and there they stood, one after another in a few blocks. Wanamakers, Gimbels, Litt Brothers, Strawbridge and Clothier. 4 great department stores, all going at once, with the sidewalks jammed and the trolleys and buses grinding along, and the newsstands and the shoeshine men working the corners. And the greatest of them was Wanamaker's, and inside it was a room that nobody who ever stood in it has forgotten. The Grand Court, an enormous open marble hall going up several floors in the middle of a department store. And in that court stood the eagle, a bronze eagle weighing 2.5 tons, bought at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 and set down in the middle of that floor. And for 2 generations, this entire city arranged its life around it. Meet me at the Eagle. That is where you met your mother when you got separated. That is where a boy waited for a girl and looked at his watch and looked down the aisle and looked at his watch again. Half the marriages in Philadelphia started with somebody standing at that Eagle. Over your head in that same room was the largest working organ on this earth. It came out of the same St. Louis Fair, and it took 13 freight cars to ship it here and 2 years to install it. And it played twice a day, every day, over the heads of the shoppers. So a woman buying a pair of gloves on an ordinary Tuesday in the middle of a store would suddenly be standing in the middle of an organ piece coming down out of the ceiling and off all that marble like the inside of a cathedral. Children were taken there just for that. There is nothing at all like it in America. Every one of those 4 stores is gone now. Go and put them back for a minute, all 4, on a Saturday with the crowd, because that is how that street stood. Every neighborhood had its own small version of downtown, 4 or 5 blocks of its own avenue, and for most families that was where the actual shopping happened. A 5 and dime with the wooden floor and the long counters. A butcher with sawdust down and the sides hanging in the case. A bakery. A shoe store where the man knelt down with the metal measure. A drugstore with a soda fountain and a fan turning. A dress shop. A hardware store run by a man who could find 1 screw in a drawer of 10,000 and would not let you buy the wrong one. And the movie house halfway down the block with its own little marquee, where the children went on Saturday and the couples went on Friday night. You could live an entire life on those 4 blocks, and a great many people did, quite happily, and never felt they had missed anything at all. And then you came home. The trolley or the bus or the L, back to whichever of those cities you belonged to, along about 6 in the evening. And the block would already be out, the chairs on the pavement, somebody's hose running along the curb to cool the stone. The children up the corner and their mothers hollering the length of the street after them. A man on his step in an undershirt with a bottle of beer saying hello to everybody who went past because he knew every one of them. That was Philadelphia. Not one city, a whole handful of them, each one certain it was the real one, all of them sitting out on the same brick steps on the same hot night. And here's the thing nobody thought to say out loud at the time. A man from Kensington and a man from South Philly and a man from North Philly would each have told you their block was nothing special, just a street, just the corner. And every one of them was living inside something that has largely gone out of American life, and none of them knew it, and they would have laughed at you for saying so. Now, tomorrow I want to take you where these people went when the work was done. And there is one story I have to tell you first, because it is the biggest thing that ever happened to this city, and then it got up and left. So stay right here on this step with me. We have walked the corners in the daylight. Now let me show you what this city did with a summer evening. And I want to start down on the pavement with the children, because Philadelphia invented its own games and played them on concrete. Half ball. And you will not find this anywhere else in the country, not really. You took a pink rubber ball, the kind every corner store in Philadelphia sold out of a bin, and you cut it clean in half with a knife, and you played with the half. Because a half ball hit right will rise and float and curve like nothing else in creation. And it will not break a window, which was the entire point and the reason your mother permitted it. You batted with a broom handle. The strike zone was chalked on a wall. And a home run was hitting one over the roof of the row house across the street, which required a hook shot with the broomstick that took a boy 2 summers to learn. There was wire ball, where you threw at the telephone wires strung over the street, and the catch depended on which wire you hit. Step ball, where you fired the ball at the point of the marble step and caught what came screaming back. Stick ball, with the sewer covers for bases, and the whole game standing to the side every time a car came down the block. Buck, which is not a game so much as an assault. Hopscotch and jacks and jump rope on the pavement. And every bit of it was run by the children themselves. There was never a grown-up anywhere near it. They made the rules, argued the rules, changed the rules when a smaller kid got involved, kept their own score, and settled their own fights, and then went home when a mother's voice came down the street with their whole name in it. On a hot afternoon, they went to the pictures, because every one of those neighborhood avenues had its own movie house. Pocket change got you in and got you a box of something, and what you got for it was a double feature and a cartoon and a couple of hours in the dark with the air conditioning going. And here, in the middle of July, that air conditioning was the main attraction and everybody knew it. Children went in a pack, sat down front, and talked at the screen from the first reel to the last. Teenage couples went upstairs in the balcony, where the usher walked up and down with a flashlight all afternoon, exactly as if he had never been young himself. And you came out at 5 in the afternoon into the white heat of the avenue and could not see for a full minute. And then in the evening, for the older ones, there was the dance, in a parish hall or a school gym or a rec center, with a record player or a local band, and a priest or a couple of mothers standing along the wall, watching the distance between the dancers with real professional interest. Everybody knew the steps, because everybody had learned them off a television program that came out of this city. And that program is where we have to stop, because it is the biggest thing that ever happened to Philadelphia. And by the summer we are standing in, it was already gone. American Bandstand. It went out to the whole nation for the first time on the 5th of August, 1957, and it was broadcast from the WFIL studios at 46th and Market Streets in West Philadelphia. And for the next 7 years, every single weekday afternoon, that plain brick building in West Philly told the United States of America what to wear, how to dance, and what record to buy. The dancers on it were not professionals. They were local kids, high school kids out of West Philly and South Philly and the Northeast, who came over after school, went through the door, and danced on national television and became famous. Genuinely famous. There were regulars on that show whose names were known in Iowa and Alabama, who got sacks of mail from teenagers in other states, who were recognized in a hotel lobby in another city. Girls all over America copied a Philadelphia girl's hair. Boys in other states learned a step that had been invented on a South Philly corner about 6 weeks earlier. And because the show was here, the record business came here. This city filled up with labels and studios and distributors and promotion men. And for a few years, Philadelphia was the middle of the American music industry. And it made stars out of neighborhood boys: Frankie Avalon, Fabian, Bobby Rydell, all of them out of South Philadelphia. Kids whose mothers were still on the same block turned into teen idols with screaming girls outside the stage door. That happened here, to ordinary families from ordinary rows. And you have to picture what that did to a row house block. A boy 2 doors down goes on television in the afternoon and is on the radio by Christmas. And his mother is still hanging the wash out on the same line she always did. And the girls start coming around the corner in 2s and 3s just to walk past his front step. Bags of mail arrived at ordinary addresses. Girls in Ohio wrote love letters to a house in South Philadelphia with the paint peeling on the doorframe. And the neighbors were proud of him and merciless with him in equal measure, because the surest way to stay ordinary in this city is to become famous in it. The same men who had known him since he was 6 went right on calling him what they had always called him, and would not have dreamed of doing otherwise. The girls on that block had it worked out to the minute. Home from school, shoes off, television on, the whole afternoon program watched with total concentration and complete seriousness. Not for the music, or not only for the music, but for what the girls on the screen were wearing, how they had done their hair, who was dancing with whom this week, and who had stopped. There were feuds on that show that the entire female population of this city followed like a serial. And then, out on the pavement afterward with a record player in the window, working out the steps, being corrected by somebody's older sister until the streetlights came on. And I have to say one thing plainly, because it is true, and because leaving it out would be dishonest. For most of that Philadelphia run, black teenagers were kept off that dance floor. The music on that program came in very large part out of Black America, and the young people who had made those dances in the first place were not welcome to come and do them on the air. That is a fact, and it belongs in this story, and this city knows it. And then, in February of 1964, the whole thing moved to California. The production packed up, the host went with it, and that studio at 46th and Market, where the entire country had been looking every afternoon for 7 years, went quiet, just like that. And after it went, the labels thinned out, and the promotion men left, and the idols got a little older. And the same month, the country met 4 young men from Liverpool, and everything on that dance floor became old-fashioned overnight. A whole industry lifted out of a city in a single winter, and moved 3,000 miles. Now, there was another stage in this city, and it never once got the national attention that studio did, and if you ask Philadelphians which one mattered more, plenty of them will tell you it was this one. The Uptown Theater, up on North Broad Street in the 2200 block in the middle of North Philadelphia. This was Black Philadelphia's great house, the city's answer to the Apollo, and on the same circuit in every way that counted. And the man who made it what it was worked a microphone down the street at WDAS. Georgie Woods, they called him, the guy with the goods. Produced the shows at the Uptown from 1957 all the way to 1972, booked the acts and emceed a good many of them himself. And here is what made him unusual. The same voice that sold you a record in the afternoon also organized civil rights marches and put the word out over the air when this city needed people in the street. He used that microphone for both jobs and never saw a contradiction in it, because there wasn't one. An Uptown show was not a concert the way you think of a concert. A bill carried 10 and 12 acts. There were several shows a day, and the whole run stayed up for about 10 days at a stretch, so a group might play 4 shows a day for a week and a half in that one theater. There was a house band in the pit that had to back every act on that bill, and Sam Reed led it from 1963 to 1971, which meant reading charts for 12 different acts 4 times a day, 10 days running. And who came through there? In April of 1962, one Uptown bill carried the Miracles and the Marvelettes and the Temptations, all on the same show, with Georgie Woods hosting it. Over those years, that stage took Ray Charles, James Brown, the Supremes, Stevie Wonder, Patti LaBelle, and a young group of brothers named Jackson. The crowd on North Broad was dressed to the last inch. Suits, hats, heels, hair done that afternoon, and the line went down the sidewalk. And when those doors opened and a couple of thousand people came out into the summer night still charged up, that avenue was the best place in Pennsylvania to be standing. For a teenager in North Philadelphia, an Uptown show was a whole campaign. You started saving weeks out. You went with 3 or 4 friends and you argued the entire way about who was worth seeing and who was overrated. You got there early because the line mattered. The line was half the evening, everybody up and down it in their best clothes, looking at each other, being looked at. And once you were inside, you did not leave, because the ticket got you the whole bill. 12 acts, one after another, the band pushing them on and off, and by the 4th act, the whole house was standing, and the ushers had given up entirely. Girls screamed until they could not speak on Monday. And a young man came out onto Broad Street at 11 o'clock at night, having watched 5 of the greatest performers in America work in one room for the price of a couple of hours of somebody's wages, and he walked home about 4 inches taller. And what those crowds went home and listened to came off the radio, and the radio in this city was a map too. WDAS on one side of the dial, with the soul and the rhythm and blues and the voices this neighborhood trusted. The big top 40 station on the other side, playing whatever was moving nationally that week. And a transistor radio on every step, on every corner, in every parked car with the windows down. And if you walked 4 blocks on a summer night, you would hear the same song start and start again out of 5 different windows. The record shops on the avenues put a speaker over the door and pushed the new single out into the street. And a young person would stop dead on the pavement, listen to the whole thing, and go in with their money. The disc jockeys came out from behind the microphone and worked the neighborhoods in person, and that was the record hop. A hall, a school gym, a fire company's social room, a couple of hundred teenagers, and a man everybody knew from the radio standing up there with a stack of 45s and a portable setup, spinning records and running the whole night. A dance contest, a giveaway, a local group up to sing 2 songs live if they were lucky. A record could be broken here in a single week that way, because the disc jockey played it at 3 hops on 3 nights, and by Friday every teenager in the neighborhood was asking for it at the shop. That is how records got made here, on the air in the afternoon, on the floor of a parish hall at night, and in the corner store's rack by the weekend. The drive-in was out on the highway past the city line, and it needed a car, so it belonged to whoever in the family had one. You went with the light still in the sky and rolled down the gravel rows, hooked the speaker on the window, and waited for it to get dark. The mosquitoes found you. The little ones were in pajamas and got sent to the swings under the screen to run themselves out. And the picture did not start until it was properly black. So you sat there watching the sky go over that enormous white screen with the crickets going, and half the children in that lot were asleep across the back seat before the first reel was through. And twice in that decade, this city got a night that everybody still talks about, and both of them involved 4 young men from England. The 2nd of September, 1964. The Beatles played Convention Hall out at 34th and Civic Center. About 12,000 people, and the tickets were gone in less than 90 minutes. And the screaming in that hall was so continuous that people who were in the building will tell you honestly that they did not hear a single song. They heard a wall of sound coming off the crowd, and they were part of it. And that was the point. And then they came back on the 16th of August, 1966, and played Kennedy Stadium down in South Philly. And this one was different. That stadium held 60,000, and they sold about 20. The lightning was going the whole time, an electrical storm sitting right over the city, and the rain held off until minutes after they walked off the stage. 2 years had passed, and the world had already moved on to something else. Anybody standing in that stadium in the lightning was watching the end of something and did not know it. Now come with me up to 21st and Lehigh, because there is one more building in North Philadelphia we have to stand in, Connie Mack Stadium. And you have to understand where it sat, not out on a highway with a parking lot around it, but jammed into the row house blocks, with people's houses directly across the street from the outfield wall. The lights on that park stood up over the roofs, and you could see them from blocks away. And on a summer night, the noise came up out of that bowl and rolled over the neighborhood, so that families sitting on their steps 6 blocks away could hear a roar go up and know that something had happened, and would already have half of it off the radio. On a night when the team was home and you did not have a ticket, you could sit on your own step in North Philadelphia with the radio on the windowsill and hear the crowd twice. Once out of the speaker, and then a half-second later, the real thing, carrying across the rooftops from 4 blocks off. The radio told you what had happened, and the neighborhood told you how much it mattered. Old men on those steps did not need the announcer at all. They could read the shape of that roar. Folks walked to that ball game. Out the front door, up the pavement, 10 minutes, and there it was. The neighbors rented out their spots at the curb and made a season's money on parking. And across the street from the outfield, on the roofs of the row houses, people sat out on folding chairs and watched the game over the wall for nothing, which the ball club disliked and could not do anything about, and which every child in North Philadelphia thought was the finest arrangement ever devised by man. Inside, the green of it, which always surprises you coming up the ramp out of the dark concourse, that impossible green under the lights, the smoke hanging in the beams, the vendors working the aisles with their arms full, the hand-worked numbers going up on the scoreboard, the beer, the fellow behind you who had an opinion about every single pitch and shared all of them, and a father explaining the infield fly rule for the 4th time to a boy who was not listening because he was watching a moth the size of a sparrow going around the light tower. And the sound of that crowd, which was not like other crowds, quicker to boo, quicker to roar, and entirely without patience, because this city has never once in its history pretended to be pleased when it was not. And then there is the thing I have to tell you about, because in Philadelphia you cannot talk about that ballpark without it. September of 1964. That team was good. That team was better than good. With 12 games left in the season, the Phillies were 6.5 games in front, and this city, which had waited since before the war, was going to the World Series. They printed the tickets. Men made arrangements at work. Families decided who was getting which seat. It was over. Everybody in Philadelphia knew it was over. And on the 21st of September, Cincinnati beat them 1-0 on a steal of home. And then they lost the next one, and the one after that. And they lost 10 straight games in 12 days at the end of a season, and threw away a pennant that had already been counted, and finished the year out of it entirely. I want you to understand what that does to a city like this one. Grown men cried. People stopped going into work. There were men who did not speak about it for years, and men who never really forgave the manager, and men who can tell you today, 60 years later, exactly where they were standing when they heard about the steal of home. This city collects its heartbreaks and keeps them in good condition, and that one is the crown of the collection. The strangest part is what it did to them. It did not make Philadelphia stop caring. It made this city care harder and louder, and with more of an edge to it forever after. That is a Philadelphia thing. Somewhere else, a town gets its heart broken and goes quiet. This town got its heart broken and got its voice. And there was one more thing this city did with a summer evening, and it belonged to the grown men, and it ran on a schedule nobody printed. The Corner League. Every neighborhood had a softball team out of a tap room or a parish or a shop, with the bar's name across the back of the shirts, playing at a lit field or a schoolyard 3 nights a week. And half the block came out to watch, sitting on the grass with folding chairs and a cooler and somebody's baby. The teams were serious. The arguments were more serious. And the losing side and the winning side went back to the same tap room afterward and stayed until it closed. And the whole thing started again Thursday. And down at the playground the same evenings, the young men played basketball under one light on cracked asphalt until they could not see the rim, and a crowd stood along the fence and told them what they were doing wrong. And here is a thing worth standing still for, because this city had 2 great stages in those years, and they were about 3 miles apart. One was a television studio at 46th and Market that showed the whole country a floor full of white teenagers dancing to records that black musicians had made. The other was a theater on North Broad, where those same musicians actually stood, 4 shows a day, in front of a house that knew every note. Most of the young people who danced on the first one never once went to the second. Most of the young people who filled the second one were never allowed onto the first. And the exact same songs were coming out of the windows on both sides of this city all summer long, every summer. Nobody planned that. It was just how the town was arranged, and it took a long time and a good many people standing in the street to start changing it. But the music never respected any of it for 1 minute. It went straight through the walls and up the streets and out of the transistor radios. And the children in both halves of this city grew up loving the same records, which is the beginning of everything else. And that was the summer entertainment of this city. A broomstick and half a ball on a corner, a dark movie house on a hot afternoon, a marquee on North Broad, a stadium wedged into the rowhouses, and an afternoon television program that had already packed up and gone west and was never coming back. Not one bit of it required money to speak of, except the ball game and the theater. The games were free, the corner was free, the radio was free, and the best night of a young person's summer usually cost about the price of a water ice and a bus ride. Now, all of that got paid for by people who were up at 5 in the morning. So tomorrow, come out with me before it is light, under the elevated tracks in Kensington, and let me show you the city that made things. 5 o'clock in the morning in Kensington, and it is still dark, and the whistle has not gone yet. But the street is already moving, doors opening up and down the row, one after another, and men coming out onto the pavement with a lunch pail in one hand, a metal pail with a lid, packed the night before, a sandwich in wax paper, and a piece of fruit and a thermos wedged in the top. Work clothes, heavy shoes. And they came out of their own doors and fell into step with each other on the way to the corner without anybody arranging it. 4 and 5 of them walking up under the elevated tracks in the dark, not talking much. You could see the mill from the end of the block. That was the thing about Kensington. The mill was not somewhere else, it was right there. A great brick building, 4 and 5 stories high, standing in among the houses with 100 windows and a stack going up out of it. A man could leave his front door at 10 minutes to 6 and be at his machine at 6. There were streets in that neighborhood where the mill gate took in half the men on the block and a good many of the women. Because this city called itself the workshop of the world, and it was not boasting. Kensington and Frankfurt and Germantown and Manayunk had made the carpets and the laces and the blankets and the hosiery and the upholstery and the braid and the yarn for the whole country. Floor after floor of looms and knitting frames and dye vats in hundreds of separate mills, some of them enormous and some of them 20 people in a converted building. Philadelphia did not have one industry the way Detroit had one industry. It had 4,000 of them, and it made everything. And when that whistle finally went and the shift started, the noise inside those rooms was something no one who has not stood in it can imagine. Looms going by the hundred all at once, in a room with a hard floor and a low ceiling, a physical, hammering, continuous noise that got into your chest. And the men and women in it learned to talk without sound, reading each other's mouths across a machine. The lint hung in the air like weather. It got in your hair and your clothes and your lungs, and the older hands had a cough they had had for 20 years. And everybody knew what it was, and nobody made much of it. They were proud of it. That is the part that does not come through when people talk about factory work now. A man who ran 4 looms and could keep all 4 running clean was a skilled man, and he knew it, and the shop knew it. And there were families in Kensington where the trade had been handed down grandfather to father to son, and the son had been in that building since he was 17. But by the decade we are standing in, those mills were dying, slowly, one at a time, without a single announcement anybody outside the neighborhood ever heard. Because the cheap synthetics came in, and the tufted carpet that a machine could make in 1/10 of the time, and the mills down south where the labor cost half of what it cost here. And a Philadelphia mill would go quiet a floor at a time. First, they would drop a shift. Then they would run 3 days. Then a notice would go up on a Friday, and that was the end of 140 years of a company. And the men would come out of that gate at noon with their tools in a box, and stand on the pavement in the daylight in their work clothes, in the middle of the day, on a street where everybody was watching from a window. And nobody came. That is the thing about how it happened here. There was no single terrible day to point at, no one enormous plant closing that made the national news. It was a slow bleed of little factories over 20 years, and the city just got a little poorer every year, block by block. And everybody adjusted, and nobody quite noticed what was happening until it had already happened. It went beyond the mills. Philco, a Philadelphia company, one that had put the radio in America's front room, and then the television set on top of it, overreached and lost its independence by 1960. That was a big employer and a big name, and it was a Philadelphia name. And children in this city had grown up thinking of that word as something the city itself made. This city smelled like what it made, and every neighborhood had its own smell on the morning air. Kensington smelled of the dye works, a chemical sweetness that turned your stomach the first week, and that you stopped noticing by the second. Down along the river it was oil and creosote and river water. In the northern blocks there were the breweries, and this was a serious beer town with its own big brewing houses. And when the mash was cooking, that smell came over whole neighborhoods, heavy and sour and bready. And folks who grew up under it will tell you they would give a good deal to smell it once more. There were the meatpacking houses and the slaughter yards, and the men who worked them came home with a particular cold iron smell in their clothes that no wash quite took out. There was a chocolate works and a soap works and a place that made cigars. You could stand on a corner in this city with your eyes shut and tell somebody where you were. And the trades ran on the union hall and on apprenticeship. And that is how a young man got a life here. The electricians, the pipe fitters, the sheet metal men, the carpenters, the printers, with their own strong old union downtown, the shipyard trades. You got in, You served your apprenticeship at low money for years, and you came out the other end with a card that meant a wage anywhere in the city. And that card was handed down. A father got his son in, and an uncle got a nephew in, and a brother-in-law got a cousin in. And that was understood by everybody as how it worked. It also meant, plainly, that a black man in Philadelphia in those years found most of those halls closed to him, no matter what he could do with his hands. And it took court orders and picket lines in the years right after to start prying them open. That is part of this city's story too, and the men who fought it were fighting their own neighbors' fathers. But there was other work, and some of it was very good indeed. Down at the bottom of South Philadelphia, on the Delaware, was the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, and up in the northeast, the Frankfurt Arsenal, federal work. And in a city where a mill could close on a Friday, a federal job was the difference between worrying and not worrying. It meant a badge, a wage that did not depend on anybody's mood, and a pension at the far end. Men and women rode down to that shipyard for 30 and 35 years, working on ships they could see from the highway. And a family lived on that job, a house, a car, a week at the shore, a child through school. And when a man retired out of the yard, the block knew it, and it meant something. The river worked. The Delaware waterfront ran piers and wharves and warehouses for miles, with the freight coming in and out and the longshore gangs working the holds by hand in those years, hooks and slings and pallets, in weather that was unbearable in either direction. There were the refineries down at the south end, and the sugar, and the rail yards behind everything, because this had been a great railroad city. And there were thousands of men in the yards, the shops, the roundhouses, and the signal towers. And then there were the jobs downtown. Those 4 big department stores each employed a small army. The selling floors, the stock rooms, the alterations department, the delivery drivers, the window trimmers, the elevator operators, the men who ran the freight docks in the back. A woman could go behind a counter at 18 and still be there at 60, knowing 400 customers by name and size and taste. It was standing work all day in good clothes on a hard floor, and you did not sit down in front of a customer. But it was clean, it was steady, and it had a certain dignity to it that people still speak about with their chin up. Lunch in this city was its own institution, and it came out of that metal pail or off a truck. Because at noon a truck came around to the mill gates and the yard gates with hoagies and cheesesteaks and coffee, and the horn went, and men came out and stood in the street in a line with their sleeves rolled and ate standing up in 20 minutes. A hoagie wrapped in white paper, cut in half, eaten off the paper on the tailgate. A soft pretzel on the side, a bottle of pop out of a cooler of ice. And in the pail from home, if the truck was too dear that week, a sandwich made at 6 in the morning by somebody who was still asleep on her feet, and a piece of cake, and a thermos of coffee that had been strong at 6 and was interesting by noon. The corner businesses ran on the same clock and never closed. The store on the corner opened at 6 for the men going out and stayed open until 10 at night for whoever had forgotten something, and the family that owned it worked every hour of that between them, the mother behind the counter, the father in the cellar or out with the truck, the children stocking shelves and doing homework on a crate, the tailor, the shoemaker with the machines in his window and a wall of other people's shoes on hooks, the barber, the woman who did alterations in her front room and had a curtain across it. Nobody in that group took a vacation, ever, and every one of them carried somebody on credit who they knew perfectly well might not pay. The children worked too and thought nothing of it. A paper route meant a boy of 11 up at 5:30 in the dark, folding papers on the step and getting them onto porches all over the neighborhood before school. And then going around on a Friday to collect from every house on the route with a punch card, which is a genuine education in human nature. Boys carried bags out of the market on 9th Street for tips. They shined shoes. They swept out a store. They went to the tap room on the corner to fetch their father, which was a job in itself. And the money went to their mother, most of it, and the rest went to the water ice window and the record shop. And getting all these people to work was a whole enterprise of its own. This city ran on rails and wires, streetcars down the middle of the avenues, with the sparks off the trolley pole and the rails set into the cobblestones. Trackless trolleys running off the overhead wires without any track at all. The Broad Street subway going straight up and down the spine of the city. And the Market Frankfurt elevated, up on its structure over Kensington Avenue and out over Market Street in the west. All of it was run by a private company in those years, and a writer complained about that company the way you complain about the weather. It was only on the 30th of September 1968 that SEPTA finally bought the whole operation out, the buses, the trolleys, the subway, and the L, and the city's transit became a public thing. And at 6:30 in the morning, those cars were packed, standing room only, with people who all knew each other by sight from 20 years of the same car at the same hour, and who nodded and said nothing and read the paper folded in quarters, which is a skill. Every one of those buildings had a whole society inside it that the public never saw. The mill had its own hierarchy. The loom fixers who could talk to the foreman like equals, the young ones sweeping the floors and hoping. The women in the knitting room who had been there since before the war and ran the place in every way that was not written down. There were nicknames that stuck to a man for 40 years. There were feuds carried on across a shop floor for a decade over something nobody could remember. There were the shop's own rituals, the collection when a man's wife had a baby, the ball busting when a young fellow turned up with a new car, the retirement after 42 years marked with a cake in the lunchroom and a watch bought out of everybody's dollar. And there was one more thing about work in this city that mattered. It was near. Most people walked to it or took one trolley. So the men and women who worked together also drank together, buried each other, married each other's cousins, and lived 4 streets apart. When that mill closed, it did not only take the wages, it took the whole society out of the middle of the neighborhood. Now let me tell you about the women, because this city ran on their hours as much as anybody's. A great many of them worked the mills themselves. The hosiery and knitting rooms in Kensington were full of women, and had been for 100 years. Others sewed in the garment shops, or worked the department store floors, or the hospitals, or cleaned the office buildings downtown at night after the office workers had gone home. And whether they worked for wages or not, they ran the house. And running a row house in that city with 3 or 4 children in it was a full-time occupation with no days off. Wash day, down in the cellar with a wringer machine, and then out on the line and in a Philadelphia row. The line ran on a pulley from a back window across to a pole, so the whole back of a block on a Monday was somebody's sheets going out over the alley. The steps scrubbed, the pavement swept out to the curb, and I do mean the pavement. A woman here swept the sidewalk in front of her own house as though it were her kitchen floor, and if you did not, the block noticed. Marketing done every couple of days on foot, carried home in string bags because there was no room to store anything and half the families had no car. And on Sunday, the gravy on the stove from 9 in the morning, filling the whole house and the whole street. On top of that, the money. She ran it. What came in, what went out, what got paid this week and what could wait. The tin on the shelf, the credit at the corner store, the insurance man at the door on a Thursday with his little book. Every household on those blocks was audited weekly by a woman at a kitchen table with a pencil, and the entire operation depended on her getting it right. and the household ran on 100 arrangements that never touched a bank. The insurance man came Thursday evenings and marked a little book, a quarter or two at a time, so that when somebody died, the family would not have to go around with a hat. The furniture and the winter coats came on time payments from a man who came to collect weekly and knew every door on the block. The savings clubs ran out of parish halls and kitchens. Neighbors minded each other's children without money changing hands, on an unwritten ledger that everybody kept in their head and nobody ever settled, because settling it would have been an insult. And when a family got into real trouble, a man hurt, a long illness, a fire, the block and the parish and the union hall closed around them inside of a day, and the food came, and an envelope came, and nobody ever discussed it in front of him. And the other economy in this city, the one nobody wrote down, ran on numbers. You gave 3 digits and your money to a fellow in a store or a bar or on a corner, and every neighborhood in Philadelphia, the Italian blocks and the Irish blocks and the black blocks alike, played it every day, all day, with the grandmothers as steady as the dock workers. A hit paid for the winter coats or squared the storebook. Everybody knew who wrote numbers on their corner. It was, for a great many people, the only bet available in a life where nothing else offered a sudden change. And here is what was happening underneath all of it, and hardly anybody said it out loud at the time. The city was starting to empty. Philadelphia had peaked at right around 2 million people, and from about these years onward, it began to lose them, and it would eventually lose something like 500,000. Not all at once, and not dramatically.
A young couple got a car and a mortgage and moved out to the northeast, or over the county line, to a new development with a lawn and a driveway and a supermarket. Their parents stayed. The row house 2 doors down went up for sale and took a while to move. The parish school's class got a little smaller. A mill closed, and 11 families went looking somewhere else. And year after year, quietly, the street got a little thinner. Nobody on those blocks in that summer would have told you their neighborhood was ending. It did not feel like ending. It felt like an ordinary hot Tuesday with the chairs out on the pavement. The store was open. The mill was running 3 days, but it was running. The boy across the street had just got taken on at the yard, and a woman standing on her scrubbed step with a broom in her hand, looking down a row of 40 houses with somebody sitting in front of every one of them, would have told you that you were talking foolishness and gone back to her sweeping. And the young man coming out of those neighborhoods in those years had a second thing waiting for them, and every mother on the block knew it by the mailbox. Because the draft board was working all through the middle and late 60s, and the boys who went were, in the main, the boys off these blocks, the Mill family's sons, the shipyard men's sons, the North Philly and the Kensington and the South Philly boys who had finished high school and gone to work instead of to college. The ones with a deferment mostly had a family that could arrange one. So the send-offs happened all summer, a Sunday dinner with everybody crowded in, the whole block out on the pavement, and a young man carrying a bag down to the corner in the morning with his father shaking his hand and not managing to say much. And the letters came back and got read aloud at kitchen tables and in the beauty shop, and the parish prayed for them by name off a list that got longer every month. Some came home fine, some came home quiet and stood on the corner in the evening with a beer, not talking, among men who had been to a different war and did not know what to say to this one. And a few did not come home, and there was a flag folded in a front room and a whole street standing outside the church, and that block never really got over it. And at last the whistle would go the other way, and the gates would open, and the whole thing would run backward, the men out of the mills and the yard and the yards, the women off the store floors and out of the offices, the packed trolleys going the other direction, the streets filling up between 5 and 6 o'clock with people coming home filthy and tired and hungry. And a man would stop at the corner tap room on his way home, because that was the arrangement and everybody understood it. Half an hour,
A beer and a shot, the fan going, the door propped, the ball game on the television up in the corner with the sound down and the radio going instead. The bartender knew his name, his wife's name, his shop, and how his week was going. And there were men in there in mill clothes, and men in there in a shipyard badge, and men in there in a store's necktie, all of them on the same block, all of them home. Then up his own marble steps, the ones that had been scrubbed on Saturday, into the house, wash at the kitchen sink with the good soap kept by the tap, supper with the fan on, and back out onto the step in the cool with everybody else, the whole block out on the pavement again, the way it was every summer night, on the last generation of streets in America that lived like that and never thought it was worth remarking on. Now, tomorrow is Saturday, and on Saturday this city did something that had nothing to do with mills or stores or trolleys, and everything to do with who these people were. So stay with me, because we are going to a block party, and then to a fight gym, and then, on Friday evening, we are getting in the car with everybody else and driving down the shore.
Sunday morning came to this city the way it came everywhere, and I will not keep you long in it. The bells went off all over Philadelphia at once, from a parish church every few blocks, and from the storefront churches and the big stone congregations in North Philly. And the whole city walked to them in its good clothes, the men in a suit in 90 degrees, the women in hats, the children scrubbed and complaining. And afterward, the pavement outside every one of those doors held the most important conversation of the week for 20 minutes. That was Sunday. But that is not what I brought you here for, because the real religion of this city happened out in the street, and it happened on the other 6 days. So let me take you to a block party. Somebody's father went and got the permit, and on the appointed Saturday, 2 wooden barricades appeared at either end of the block. And from that moment, the street belonged to the people who lived on it. This city has always run on that. A block that organizes itself, with somebody unofficially in charge of it. Usually a woman in her 50s who had decided years ago that this block was going to hold together and had never been voted out of the position. The whole street went to work on it. Tables came out of kitchens and got lined down the middle of the road, end to end, and covered in paper. Every house sent something out. The trays of macaroni and the meatballs, the potato salad in a dishpan, the fried chicken, the cakes, the water ice in a cooler, a case of beer and a washtub of ice for the men. Somebody ran an extension cord out a first-floor window and put a record player on the sill with the speakers turned out at the street. Somebody opened the hydrant for the little ones at the far end. Crepe paper got strung across from window to window over the road. It went all day and all night. The old people out in aluminum chairs against the wall, holding court and correcting everybody. The men standing around the beer. The women running the whole operation and never once sitting down. The children going up and down that street on bicycles and skates through a crowd that just moved around them. The girls doing the dances they had learned off television. And by 10 o'clock, the grown people were dancing in the middle of the road under the crepe paper. And a couple who had been married 30 years would get out there, and everybody would clear a space. And somebody's uncle would sing along and be told to sit down. And when it was over, the tables went back in through the front doors. The men rolled the barricades to the curb, somebody hosed the street, and by Sunday morning that road looked like it had never happened. The block ran on a set of rules that nobody had ever written down, and everybody obeyed. You swept your pavement. You scrubbed your steps. You did not park in front of somebody else's house if you could help it. And if it snowed and a man dug his car out, that space was his, and everybody knew it. Everybody's mother was everybody's mother, and a child acting up 4 streets from home would be corrected on the spot by a stranger who somehow knew his last name, and it would be at his house before he was. Nobody locked a door in the daytime. You did not have to knock, you hollered through the screen.
And when something happened, that block moved before anybody asked. A wedding out of the parish church meant the whole street on the pavement to watch the bride come out of a front door 3 houses down, in a dress her aunt had made, and then a reception in a hall with a band and a long table of food 11 women had cooked between them. And a death meant the wreath on the door and the front room turned over to it for 2 nights, with the neighbors standing out on the pavement in shirt sleeves in the dark, taking turns going in. Food arrived for a week in covered dishes with tape on the bottom so the plates would find their way home. And on the morning of the funeral, every house on that row had its blinds pulled down and the whole street stood out front, not saying anything, while the car went past. Nobody organized any of that. It was simply what a block was for. And every street and every one of these neighborhoods did it the same way, whatever church they went to and whatever language their grandmothers swore in. And then there was a day this city could celebrate the way no other city in America can. Because the 4th of July in Philadelphia is not a holiday somebody imported. This is where it happened. 2 blocks from where the trolleys ran, in a red brick building on Chestnut Street, a group of men had sat in a hot room in the summer of 1776 and signed the thing. And the bell itself in those years was in a small glass and brick house right there where anybody could walk up to it, and every child in Philadelphia was taken to see it, and every one of them ran a finger along that crack, and the guard let them. Those years were exactly when the whole area around it was being torn out and rebuilt as a mall. The old blocks coming down, the new lawns and walks going in, the city turning its own birthplace into a place to bring visitors. So a Philadelphian in that decade watched the middle of his own city get remade around the building the country started in. On the 4th, that city came out. Bands, a parade on the parkway with the flags out and the fire companies and the school bands and the veterans marching, and men from 2 wars in their old jackets, buttoned. Speeches nobody listened to. The neighborhoods doing their own version on their own blocks. Flags in every front window on a row house street is a thing to see, 40 of them in a row down one side. Cookouts on the pavement, and at dark the fireworks going up over the river and the whole street out on the steps watching them over the rooftops, and the little ones with sparklers on the sidewalk making letters in the dark. And there was something in it that was slightly different here, and every Philadelphian felt it without saying it. Everybody else in the country was celebrating an idea. This city was celebrating an address. Now, let me take you somewhere hotter and a good deal less patriotic, because this city's other church was a room with a ring in it. Philadelphia was a fight town, and it was a fight town in every neighborhood. There were gyms up narrow stairs over a store, gyms in a basement under a bar, gyms in a church hall on Tuesdays and Thursdays, a couple of heavy bags, a speed bag, a ring with the ropes taped, a smell of leather and canvas and sweat that got into the walls and never left. And on a summer afternoon, a boy of 14 would climb those stairs because somebody had told him he had a punch. And an old man who had fought in the 30s for very little money would look him over and tell him to skip rope for a month before he touched anything, and mean it. In those very years, in one of those rooms, there was a young man who had come north from South Carolina and landed here with nothing. He got a job in a slaughterhouse, and in the cold room where the sides of beef hung, he would work out on them with his hands wrapped, punching frozen beef in a meat locker on his own time, years before anybody thought of putting that in a picture. His trainer saw the left hook first. And in 1964, he went to the Olympic Games in Tokyo and won the heavyweight gold medal for the United States with a broken finger on his hand that he did not tell anybody about. And in August of 1965, he turned professional in this city and knocked his man out in the first round. Within a few more years, he would be the heavyweight champion of the world, and the whole country would know his name. And everybody in these neighborhoods would say the same thing, which was, "He is ours. He came up here. He worked at the packing house." A fight night in Philadelphia, at an arena or a hall or a ballroom, was a whole city's night out. Men in suits, cigar smoke, the neighborhood contingents for each fighter shouting at each other across the room. Because everybody in that hall was from somewhere, and their fighter was from there too. And on the blocks that could not get in, the fight came out of the radios on every step. And men who had never been in a ring in their lives stood on the pavement and demonstrated what he ought to have done. The other faith was the ball club, and it worked on the same principle. You did not choose it, you inherited it, and you were stuck with it for life. We stood in that ballpark last night, but the faith did not live in the ballpark. It lived on the corner, and in the tap room, and at the kitchen table, in an argument that never ended and was never meant to. A boy learned it from his father the way he learned his prayers, and he learned along with it that this city's teams would break his heart on a schedule, and that he would go right on anyway, and that quitting was not among the available options. Now, I have to take you to a wall. On Girard Avenue, right in the middle of North Philadelphia, in the middle of a black neighborhood, there stood a school called Girard College, behind a 10-foot stone wall that ran around 43 acres of lawns and buildings. And by the terms of the will that founded it 100 and some years before, that school admitted only white orphan boys. So mothers walked their children past that wall every single day of their lives to a crowded school down the street, while behind it, on the other side of the stone, there were playing fields and dormitories that their sons could not enter. And on the 1st of May, 1965, a picket line went up outside that wall, and it stayed every day, in the rain, in the heat of that summer, in the cold when it came, 7 months and 17 days, right through to the 17th of December. It was led by the head of this city's chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, a lawyer named Cecil B. Moore, who was blunt and loud and completely unintimidated. And a great deal of that line was teenagers, young people from the surrounding blocks, high school age, who walked that wall after school and on weekends for the better part of a year. And on the 4th of August, 1965, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to Philadelphia and stood at that wall and spoke to that crowd. And they won. It took 3 more years of courts after the picket line came down, but in June of 1968, Cecil B. Moore stood up at a victory rally. And on the 11th of September of that year, 4 young black men walked in through those gates as students, behind a wall that had stood for well over a century. And I want to put one other thing beside it, because this city's story in that decade is not only the good day. On the 28th of August, 1964, a scuffle with police at 22nd and Columbia. A car stopped in an intersection, a couple arguing, officers pulling at a woman, and a rumor going through that neighborhood within the hour that a pregnant woman had been beaten set off 3 days of it. Nobody was killed, but 341 people were hurt, 774 were arrested, and 225 stores along Columbia Avenue were smashed or burned. And that avenue never came back. A great many of those businesses simply never opened their doors again. And the neighborhood that had a shopping street on Wednesday did not have one on Monday, and never got another. That happened in the same city, in the same summers, 11 blocks from that wall. Now, let it be Friday evening, and let me get you out of this hot city, because that is what everybody else was doing. Because on a Friday in July, Philadelphia emptied. The car got packed at 5 o'clock, trunk full, the cooler, the beach chairs, the umbrella, the bag of towels, a child in the middle of the back seat who did not want to be there. And then out across the bridge and onto the pike. And every other car on that road was somebody from your own city doing the same thing. And then the light changed, the way it does when you get out of a city, and it went wide and white and sandy. Pine trees, farm stands with tomatoes and corn, a stretch of marsh, and then the smell came in the windows, that flat, green, salt marsh smell that means the ocean is about 10 minutes off, and every child in the car sat up. Because Philadelphians do not go to the beach, they go down the shore. That is what it is called here, and it has never once been called anything else. And it was in this city's newspapers by the early 50s, and it will outlive all of us. The shore was divided up by tribe, exactly the way the city was. Wildwood was for the young, 200 and more motels down there, all neon and space-age angles, and names like a science fiction picture, with the boardwalk and the rides and the music going until 2 in the morning, and college kids working the season. The quiet family towns were dry and church-going, where families rented the same place the same 2 weeks every year for 20 years, and knew the family who came the fortnight before them. And Atlantic City's boardwalk was for everybody. The big old hotels and the piers running out over the water, and the rolling chairs and the auction houses, and the saltwater taffy pulled in a window by a machine that a child could watch for 20 minutes. A shore week for a rowhouse family was 2 rooms in somebody's boarding house, or the upstairs of a house 6 blocks off the beach, with the sand tracked through every square foot of it. You walked to the beach in the morning with everything you owned. You came back at 5, burned, and everybody took turns at the outdoor shower. And in the evening, up onto the boards. And that is where I want to leave the daylight. Because a boardwalk at night in that decade was one of the great experiences this country offered anybody. The boards under your feet, the lights strung the whole length of it, the smell of popcorn and fudge and salt and frying, the rides going out over the water and the screaming coming off them in bursts, girls walking one way and boys walking the other, both of them pretending it was accidental. The games, the wheel, the milk bottles, the water pistols in a row and a bell going off. A boy carrying an enormous stuffed animal he had spent $4 winning that was worth about 80 cents. Old couples on the benches facing out to sea, saying nothing, sitting exactly as they had sat there for 40 summers. And past the rail, out beyond all that light, the ocean working away in the dark. The boardwalk had its own economy of small pleasures, all of them costing about a quarter. The fudge cut off the slab and weighed out in a white box. The caramel corn, the frozen custard, the hot dogs, the fortune-telling machine with the wax gypsy in the glass case, the photo booth with the curtain, the man who would guess your weight and be insulting about it either way. And every family came home with a load of junk that nobody needed and everybody kept for 30 years. On those boards on a Saturday night in that decade, you would find the whole of Philadelphia mixed together. The Kensington families and the South Philly families and the North Philly families, all of them 100 miles from their own corners, in their good shirts, eating the same fudge. In the city they lived 4 miles apart and might as well have been in different countries. Out there, at the rail, they were all just Philadelphia. And then Sunday afternoon, the whole thing in reverse. The car loaded with wet towels and sand and a sunburn nobody wanted to talk about. The traffic crawling back up the pike with everybody who had left on Friday. The children asleep in a pile in the back. And the moment where the marsh smell went away and the air got heavy again, and you knew you were nearly home. Back over the bridge, back down your own street, where the people who had not gone were sitting out front, and they wanted to hear about it. So you sat down on the step in your salt-stiff clothes and told them, and the week started again in the morning. And once in those years, the whole street came out to look at the sky. On a July night at the end of the decade, 2 men walked on the moon, and this city watched it the way it watched everything, together, on the pavement. Somebody on the block carried a television set out the front door and set it on a chair on the step with an extension cord running back inside. And 40 people stood around it in the dark on a rowhouse street, in their undershirts, with the children up long past their bedtime. And when it happened, they all did the same thing. They looked up.
Right there over the roofline and the wires and the chimney pots, and then back down at the little gray screen, and then up again. And an old man said it could not be, and his grandson told him it certainly could, and both of them stood there in the warm dark, looking at the same moon. And now I have to tell you the rest of it, standing right here on these boards. Nobody out there that night was worried about anything. Why would they be? But look at what that decade had already done to that city while everybody was busy having a good summer. The show had gone. The single biggest thing this city ever gave the country. An afternoon program out of a plain building at 46th and Market that had told the whole United States how to dance for 7 straight years, had packed up in February of 1964 and moved to California. And it took the record business with it, and it was not coming back. The pennant had gone, thrown away in 12 days that September. Connie Mack Stadium had a few years left. The ball club would leave it in 1970, and it would come down. And out in Kensington and Frankfurt and Manayunk, the mills kept going quiet. 1 floor at a time, 1 notice on a Friday at a time, until this city that had 2 million people in it would lose something like 500,000 of them, and a whole world of work that had been handed father to son. And the country stopped looking at Philadelphia. That is the plain fact of it. For a few years in there, this city had been the middle of everything, and then it was not. And the attention went west and never really came back. But this city is a hard one to write off, and here is what it did. Because a few years after that studio went dark, 2 songwriters from these same neighborhoods sat down and built their own studio right here. And they made a new sound out of exactly what was already in this town. The gospel out of the North Philly churches, the harmony off the street corners, the strings and the sweetness and the beat. And by the 70s, the whole world was dancing to records made in Philadelphia again, in every country on earth. And this time, nobody had to come from somewhere else to hand it to them. They did not get their show back. They made a better one. And that is about as Philadelphia a story as there is. Somebody takes the thing you built and drives away with it, and you stand there on your own corner and build another one, and you never once say thank you for it. So it was real, all of it. There truly was a market street where the peppers roasted at 6 in the morning and you did not touch the fruit. There truly was a corner with a water ice window and a pretzel man, and a store with the credit book under the counter. There truly were boys cutting a rubber ball in half to hit it over a roof. There truly was a bronze eagle in the middle of a department store where this whole city met, with the biggest organ on earth playing over their heads. There was a theater on North Broad with 12 acts on the bill and a house band that could read anything. There was a picket line that stood at a stone wall for 7 months and 17 days and won. And on a Friday in July, the whole city got in the car and drove for the ocean. So close your eyes for a minute and be back on those boards. Feel the warped boards under your shoes and the day's heat still coming up out of them. Smell the fudge and the salt and the fried dough. Hear the rides and the bell on the milk bottle stand and a radio and the water going out there past the rail in the dark.
Let the lights go all the way down the boardwalk as far as you can see. Everybody you loved is out there walking it, sunburnt, in a good shirt, with nowhere to be until Monday. Now, before you go, do me one thing. Tell me your corner, the street, the parish, the store, whose window the record player was in on your block. And tell me which shore town was yours, because I know for a fact that people are going to argue about it down there, and they should. Somebody reading it grew up 4 streets from you and has been waiting 50 years to hear the name of that corner store said out loud. I am glad you walked it with me tonight. Stay with us. There are a lot of corners left. Go on in now. The boards are emptying out, and the ocean will still be doing that in the morning. I'm Henry. I miss those days. The sweet old America.